Hi, welcome back to RPMbassy with myself, John and Mark. We've now reached the dizzy heights of number 2. This number 2, it was quite difficult because this should be my number 1. But I put number 2. Anyway, it's another band that I was obsessed with. And again, you're going to see the connection between 3 of the bands from Culture Club to Bow Wow Wow to this one here. And it's Adam and the Ants, Kings of the Wild Frontier. Now, this album, when this first came out, this came out in November 1980. I would have been 10 years old. And I remember he had just been on Top of the Pops. And what used to happen back, we didn't have things like internet or kind of phones or anything like that. And I remember coming into school the next day and everyone was going crazy about this person just seen on Top of the Pops. And it was Adam and the Ants doing Dog Eat Dog. We all became obsessed with him like really quite fast. And then basically we went down to Woolworths and we bought Dog Eat Dog single. I think it was like something like 70 pence. And we bought Kings of the Wild Frontier on single because that literally just got released at the same time. But then this album came out and it was a record that I just couldn't stop listening to. And then I kind of found out, so this was the second album from Adam and the Ants. And I already knew Adam and the Ants because I was into kind of like punk at the time. And the first incarnation of Adam and the Ants was a punk band. And their first album was Duet Wears White Socks with Adam Ant, Dave Barbarossa, Lee Gorman and Matthew Ashman. The whole band then became Bow Wow Wow, leaving Adam Ant on his own. He then partnered up with Marco Proni and they wrote this album, Kings of the Wild Frontier. And obviously they adopted the Burundi beat as well, just like Bow Wow Wow. So they released things like Dog Eat Dog, they released Kings of the Wild Frontier, Ant Music was the first big hit, and then obviously the other records became a hit. So he kind of adopted this kind of like native Indian cross with, you know, the braided from the Hussars, incorporate that pirate look. So he incorporated a lot of looks, and obviously using the white stripes on his face. And for a 10-year-old, it's like, oh my God, what is going on? This is God. And this whole album is just incredible. The artwork was actually taken by a photographer called Peter Ashworth. And what they did, Adam Ant Hideout Studio, and they performed one of the songs. I think it was the Kings of the Wild Frontier. And what Peter Ashworth was doing was taking photos from a screen. And that's why it looks all kind of pixelated and very digital. It's now become iconic, this sleeve. When it comes to the back, I think this is another kind of from the video itself. And this was the second incarnation of Adam and the Ants. To me, the best incarnation of Adam and the Ants. So you got Adam Ant, Marco Prodi, those who wrote the album. And then you had the 2 drummers, which was Terry Lee and Merrick. And then you had, to me, the punkiest bassist ever, Kevin Mooney. I think he was only 18 or something at the time doing this album. But there's tracks on here like Doggy Dog, Ant Music, Feed Me to the Lions. And he kind of incorporates a lot of like, lot of native Indians. Like there's a track in here he mentions them all. So you got Blackfoot, Pawnee, Chinese, Crow, and the name. So he mentions all the kind of different native Indians, and also pirates. You know, Kings of the Wild Frontier is all about the redskin. Jolly Roger making history, and also there's kind of like because he's a big Clint Eastwood fan. So there's a couple of tracks on here like Los Rancheros, which is very kind of like you'd expect to hear in a Clint Eastwood film. But the American version of this, they took off one of the tracks on here, which is Making History. Why, I don't know. And they replaced it with a track called Press Darlings, which is the B-side to Kings of the Wild Frontier. I don't know why they did that, but the American version has a different track list. But this is the track list that we all know. And also recently, he released a box set, and it's one of the best box sets I think I've ever seen. And Kings of the Wild Frontier as well. And he's just like, they spent a lot of time on this. So you get like the album, you get all the demos on here, you get the original artworks, the original photo sessions, all of it inside this box set. So if you haven't got a copy of this and you are a fan of this band and this album, this is definitely something you go and pick up. I mean, it's just great. Like gold, it's definitely worth every penny. But that's the box set, and that's my number 2, and it's Adam and the Ants, Kings of the Wild Frontier. Over to you, Mark.
Lovely. So for my number 2, I picked a band who I think are incredibly underappreciated, to the point where getting vinyl pressings of their stuff is difficult even for them to do. You know, they've just had a new album come out at the end of last year. Even they aren't able to get they weren't able to get a vinyl release in time for the album's release date, so that's actually coming out this year. But this is their debut full length, and this is I Am Hollywood by he is legend. So this is a 2004 album. They're kind of like you could call them like southern metal. They're from North Carolina. They've got kind of like a little bit of that kind of country twang to them, but it's mostly like hard rock metal. As I said, I think they're one of the most underappreciated bands because what they actually put into their songs is so much more than the sum of its parts. Like, you look at it and you think, oh, okay, it's a metal band with 2 guitarists, a vocalist, a bassist, a drummer, whatever. But there's a lot of poetics and like pantomime-y kind of vibes to this sort of stuff. Lyrically, Shyla Kroon, the vocalist, the stuff that he writes is it's almost like Shakespearean, and like there's some weird like creepy characters that he plays when he's like singing his songs. Like, a lot of it is from the perspective of someone else. You've got songs like probably the biggest takeaway from this is the song China White, which started kind of like a storyline almost across their albums. So they had their China White on this one, then China White 2, China White 3, and then in the later albums they just made them into full like song titles. So I think on the album Heavy Fruit it was the title track. Then they had the song called The Garden, and then more recently they've had a song called Boogie Woman, which is kind of the way they tied off the story. But then their latest album, they released a song, or they have a song on there called Return to the Garden. So it's all about this gardener, and it's a weird story. Essentially the plants are kind of turning on the family who own the property, and he's like the gardener, and he's kind of like almost falling in love with his plants. So whether or not the plants actually are turning, or if it's just him like descending like into madness. But yeah, the plot of China White 1 is that he essentially like gets a gun, kills the family, and then it just progresses lyrically through all the other iterations of it. But yeah, a lot of stuff like that on their albums as a whole. Lots of weird characters that he plays. The guitar work on this as well. I think probably some of, again, the most underappreciated songwriting in any sort of hard rock or metal scene, because it isn't just like power chords and stuff like that. There's really interesting stuff going on. It's almost got like some psychedelic flair to it without sounding like... I personally, I'm not a big fan of psychedelica, but it's got those kind of like openness to it. Like Dinner with a Gypsy is a really great song for that. Like, I don't know, it's all, not ambient, but it's kind of lets the guitar wash over you a little bit.
Right.
It's hard to describe. Songs like The Seduction as well, that was the, I think possibly the only single from this album. And that's got a music video which is absolutely batshit bonkers. Like, it's pretty much just all puppets doing like a Punch and Judy show. It's just, it kind of sums up how they sound. It's just like pantomime-y, with slightly serious dark undertones. Like, it's a really cool presentation of, like, as I said, weird lyrics, and like cool themes and stuff like that.
Where did you find it? When did you find this album? This band? So
the band themselves, Seduction, I heard that probably 2005, 2006. Like, it wasn't long after the song had come out. Never really liked it, to be honest. Like, for a long time, I was super turned off by how the song sounded, because there was a lot of screaming on it.
Right.
And at that age, wasn't interested in that. Slowly but surely, I kind of got into that sort of subgenre of metal with like sort of heavier vocals. Went back to this and got into that song. Didn't really give them too much thought other than that. They released the album Few in, I think, 2017. And I went back to them then, gave them a proper listen. Heavy Fruit as well. That was an album I kind of like, I heard a couple of songs, but hadn't really given it too much thought. Like, I just knew the singles. But when I heard Few, listened to the whole thing, I was like, right, I'm going to go back, give it a proper go. And then that was when I was able to like, oh, okay, there's a story here. Because I worked out, you know, obviously China White 1, 2 and 3, that's easy enough. And then I sort of looked online, okay, so this is the song on the other albums, that's where that links up. And like having that thematic story going all the way through, like that kind of hooks you in. And I think it's almost like a little bit of a treat. You listen to the whole album and then you get to that and you kind of piece together little narratives.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next video, which is the final one, the best album, a top 20 best album of myself and Marc's. Catch you in the next video.